London woke under a soft drizzle that morning, the kind of quiet rain that made the city hum rather than roar. Elliot Ward watched from his kitchen window, a mug of coffee in hand, the steam fogging up the glass. It was Sophie's birthday and her favorite day of the year, and he'd planned everything down to the smallest detail. The cake sat neatly boxed on the counter, candles tucked beside it, a small note written in his careful handwriting, "To my world, my reason, happy birthday, love." He buttoned his coat and stepped into the gray morning, the city still half asleep. The sound of tires slicing through puddles and the faint smell of roasted beans from the cafe on the corner reminded him why he loved mornings like this. Simple, slow, full of quiet promise. He stopped by the florist, picking up her favorite white lilies. The florist smiled knowingly. She'd seen Elliot here every year on the same day, always with that soft, hopeful look in his eyes. At work, the day passed in its usual rhythm: edits, phone calls, the occasional burst of laughter from the sound booth. Elliot worked as an audio producer for Soundline Radio, a London-based talk show hosted by the charismatic Daniel Fraser, the sort of man who walked into a room and made everyone's sentences feel smaller. But Daniel had always treated Elliot kindly, or so it seemed. They'd worked side by side for years, built trust, shared long nights over deadlines and takeaway curries. If Elliot had a blind spot, Daniel occupied it comfortably. By late afternoon, the studio quieted. Daniel stretched, rubbing his eyes. "Good show today," he said, reaching for his coat. "I'm heading off. Fancy numbers later?" Elliot smiled. "Not tonight, mate. Got a birthday to celebrate." Daniel grinned, that trademark half-smile. "Of course. Don't let me keep you." When Daniel left, Elliot lingered, finishing a few edits. He wanted everything perfect before the weekend. On his desk, framed beside his monitor, was a photo from their wedding. Sophie laughing in the wind, her veil tangled in his tie, the both of them glowing with that fearless kind of love that only exists in memories. By the time he packed up, the rain had slowed to a mist. London's skyline shimmered, streetlights reflecting in puddles. He walked home, humming softly, thinking of Sophie's face when she'd see the cake. The candles, the lilies. She'd been distant lately, distracted, but he'd convinced himself it was just stress, the kind that ebbs away once you stop noticing it. Outside their flat, he paused, took a deep breath, and smiled. He balanced the cake box in one hand, lit the candles inside the hallway, and pushed open the door as softly as he could. "Sophie?" he called, his voice light. "Guess who's home early?" The lights were dim, the flat strangely still, save for a faint murmur from upstairs. Laughter. A voice that wasn't hers. He froze for half a second, heart thudding, the cake trembling in his hands. It could have been the television, he told himself. A neighbor. Anything, but then another sound. Closer this time. His name, spoken in a tone that didn't belong to him. The rain outside had stopped. But inside him the storm began. He stood at the bottom of the stairs, the soft glow from the candles flickering against the walls. For a heartbeat, everything felt suspended. The kind of silence that stretches so long it almost hums. Elliot swallowed hard, forcing one shaky breath, then another. The laughter upstairs grew clearer now, punctuated by the sound of movement, two voices, one undeniably hers. He took a step, then another, each one heavier than the last. His mind refused to catch up with his body. Halfway up, his foot hit a creaky stair and the noise stopped. The silence that followed was worse, thick, knowing. He reached the bedroom door. It wasn't fully shut. A strip of warm light spilled into the hallway, slicing across his shoes. Elliot pushed it open, and there they were. Sophie, Daniel. The cake box slid from his hand and landed with a dull thud, candles still burning, frosting smeared against the floor. Sophie's face went pale, her lips forming his name. Daniel, half-dressed, turned away, muttering something useless. An apology, a curse, it didn't matter. None of it mattered. For a moment, Elliot just stood there staring, his mind blank and roaring all at once. Every image of their life together flashed before him. The wedding, the tiny flat they'd painted together, late-night dinners, shared playlists, each one collapsing in on itself like a dying star. How long? The question came out barely a whisper. Sophie stammered. "It's not what you think." "Don't," Elliot said sharply, his voice breaking. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, eyes fixed on the floor. A few months, he muttered, then paused, correcting himself. Nearly a year. Nearly a year. The words hit harder than any slap could. The room blurred. He felt himself swaying. Sophie's tears came fast, rehearsed, reaching for him, but he stepped back. She started to speak again, excuses maybe, but he didn't want to hear any of them. He didn't shout, didn't curse, didn't break a thing. He just turned around, walked out, and left the door open behind him. Downstairs, the candles still flickered, their tiny flames reflected in the polished floor. He crouched, lifted the cake box, and sat heavily on the sofa. The note he'd written that morning fluttered free. To my world, my reason. Happy birthday, love. He stared at it for a long time. Then he blew out the candles one by one. The smoke curled upward, soft and gray, carrying with it the last breath of a promise that had already died. Sophie followed him down, barefoot, trembling. "Elliot, please," she whispered. "It was a mistake." "I don't even know why." He stood, turned to her slowly, eyes hollow. "You knew exactly why," he said. "You just didn't think I'd find out." He left before she could answer. The door clicked shut, the rain starting up again as if the sky itself couldn't hold it in anymore. He didn't look back, not once. The sound of her crying faded behind him until all he could hear was the rain and the faint hiss of passing tires. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell struck 6. The candles were out, the lights were off, and for the first time in years, Elliot walked into a night that belonged to no one but him. The streets of London blurred past as Elliot walked, the rain stitching silver lines across his coat. He didn't know where he was going. He just knew he couldn't be there, not in that flat, not breathing the same air that carried her perfume. Every step felt weightless, unreal, as though he were drifting outside his own body. He crossed the bridge, the Thames glinting beneath the streetlights, and stopped halfway, gripping the cold railing. His reflection stared back, pale, drenched, eyes glassy and distant. Somewhere deep down, he felt an ache that was too large for tears. This wasn't just heartbreak. It was disorientation. The ground he'd built his life on had shifted, and he was still trying to find where solid began again. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it at first, assuming it was Sophie, but it buzzed again, and again. Reluctantly, he pulled it out, ready to silence it for good. The name on the screen wasn't hers. It was Amelia. He hesitated, thumb hovering before he answered. "Hey, Mel." There was a pause, then her voice gone soft, trembling. "Elliot, are you sitting down?" He frowned. "No, what's happened?" She exhaled shakily, and the words came out cracked. "It's Dad." For a moment, he thought he'd misheard. "What about Dad?" "He's gone." The world went still. The rain, the traffic, the distant city hum, it all dissolved into silence. He closed his eyes, pressing his forehead against the railing. "When?" "This morning," Amelia whispered. "Heart attack. I tried calling earlier, but..." She trailed off. "Where are you?" Elliot didn't answer. He couldn't. He stared out at the river, its dark surface swallowing the city lights. A strange laugh escaped him, half sob, half disbelief. 2 lives ended in one day, one by choice, the other by fate. "I'll come down," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "Brighton, right?" "Yes, Mum's here. She keeps asking for you." "I'll be there tonight." He hung up before she could reply. For a long time he stood there, his phone still in his hand, the rain easing to a drizzle. Around him the city moved on, indifferent. He shoved the phone back in his pocket, drew a deep breath, and started walking again. When he reached the station, the last train to Brighton was already boarding. He found an empty seat by the window and sank into it, watching water beat against the glass. A couple across the aisle laughed quietly, their fingers intertwined, and for a moment he hated them for their innocence. He closed his eyes, resting his head against the window, the rhythm of the tracks matching the dull thud in his chest. He thought of Sophie, of her voice, of Daniel's face, then of his father, stern, practical, distant, but always there, the one man who never lied to him. Gone now, just like everything else. When the train pulled into Brighton, the platform was empty except for Amelia, standing under the yellow light, coat wrapped tightly around her. She looked smaller than he remembered, her eyes rimmed red. As soon as she saw him, she stepped forward, and without a word, they embraced. For the first time that night, Elliot let the tears fall. The morning of the funeral arrived cold and quiet. the kind of day where the sky seemed unsure whether to rain or not. The chapel stood on the edge of Brighton's old cemetery, its stone walls darkened with moss, the air heavy with sea salt. Elliot hadn't slept. His eyes were raw, his mind replaying every conversation he'd ever had with his father, and every one they never got to finish. Inside, people murmured in low voices, the sound like the rustling of paper. His mother sat in the front row, a white handkerchief clutched in her hand, her gaze fixed on the coffin as though she might will it to open. Amelia sat beside her, fingers entwined with their mother's, holding her steady. Elliot stayed near the back for a while, not ready to face anyone. He watched as the vicar spoke, words blurring into a soft hum. He wasn't hearing him, not really. His thoughts were elsewhere. London, Sophie, Daniel. Every memory pressed against his skull like a bruise. When it came time to speak, Amelia nudged him gently. "You should say something," she whispered. He hesitated, then nodded, his legs moving before his mind caught up. He stood before the small crowd, looking down at the simple oak coffin. "My dad," he began, voice cracking slightly, "wasn't a man of many words, but when he did speak, you listened, because he meant every one of them. He taught me how to work hard, how to tell the truth, and how to love quietly but completely." He paused, swallowing hard. "I didn't realize how much of him lived in me until now. I wish I'd told him more, how proud I was to be his son, how much I looked up to him. But if there's one thing I know, it's that he knew anyway." A few people nodded. His mother wept softly. Elliot stepped back, letting the vicar continue. As the service ended, he lingered by the coffin, fingers brushing against the wood. "Goodbye, Dad," he whispered. Outside, the cold air stung his face. Mourners offered their condolences, brief touches on his shoulder, sympathetic smiles. He thanked them all, numb, until one figure made him stop, a woman in her 60s dressed in black but unfamiliar. She approached slowly, eyes wary but kind. "You're Elliot, yes?" He nodded. "I'm Margaret, your father's solicitor." He blinked, surprised. "Oh, right. Thank you for coming." She hesitated, glancing around before lowering her voice. "I know this isn't the right time, but your father left something for you. Personally, he was very specific about it." Elliot frowned. "Something?" She nodded, handing him a small brown envelope, sealed and marked in his father's handwriting. "For Elliot, after I'm gone." He stared at it, the weight of the paper suddenly immense. "Did he say what's inside?" Margaret shook her head. "Only that you'd understand when you read it." Elliot slipped the envelope into his coat pocket, a strange chill settling over him. That night, when everyone had gone to bed, he sat by the living room window overlooking the sea. The envelope lay on the table before him, its edges soft from years of being handled. With trembling hands, he tore it open. Inside was a single page, folded twice. He opened it, breath catching as he recognized his father's bold handwriting. "If you're reading this, son, I need you to know the truth. There's something about our family I never told you." Elliot froze. The words blurred. The letter wasn't long, barely a few paragraphs, but what it said would change everything he thought he knew about who he was, and why Daniel Fraser might not just be his boss, but his brother. Elliot sat frozen on the edge of his bed, his father's letter still trembling in his hands. The words were impossible to unsee. "Daniel Fraser is your half-brother." His heart thudded so loudly it drowned out the faint sound of the sea crashing against the Brighton pier. The letter explained fragments of a story his father had buried decades ago, how long before meeting Elliot's mother, he had fallen in love with a woman named Marianne Fraser. They'd shared a brief but deep relationship while working together in London, before life and choices tore them apart. Marianne later married another man, Daniel's father. His dad had walked away quietly, choosing family stability over scandal, and had never spoken of it again. But now, it made too much sense. The way Daniel had always seemed oddly familiar, the same sharp jawline, the same way he smiled when amused but trying not to show it. Elliot read the letter again and again as though another reading might make it false. Instead, each word settled heavier in his chest. "If one day you meet him," the letter ended, "don't hate him. None of it was his fault. You both deserved the truth." He didn't sleep that night. The next morning he drove to London, mind spinning. He needed to see Daniel, needed answers. But how do you tell someone you've just discovered you share blood, especially when that person also happens to be the man your ex cheated with? At the office, Daniel was in his glass-walled corner room mid-conversation with a client. He caught Elliot's reflection in the glass and paused. "Give us a minute," he told the client, stepping out. "You shouldn't be here yet," Daniel said softly. "Take the week off. I know about your father." Elliot's jaw clenched. "You knew?" Daniel blinked, confused. "Knew what?" Elliot reached into his coat pocket, pulling out the letter. "That we're brothers." For a moment, Daniel just stared, laughter almost forming before dying instantly when he saw Elliot's face. "What are you talking about?" Elliot handed him the letter. Daniel read it in silence, his expression changing with every line. Disbelief, then shock, then something close to grief. I didn't know," Daniel murmured. "My mum, she never said anything." "I swear." Elliot looked away, pacing. "All this time you were with Sophie. You sat across from me every day. You're him. You're the reason my life fell apart." Daniel took a step forward. "Elliot, I didn't know. If I had, I would never—" "Don't!" Elliot's voice broke. "Don't you dare try to justify any of this. You took everything from me." Silence filled the office. A few employees glanced up through the glass walls, pretending not to eavesdrop. Daniel spoke quietly, voice cracking. "You think I wanted this? To find out that the man I've worked beside, the one He stopped himself. "We didn't choose this, Elliot." Elliot's hand shook. "No, but someone did. And he's gone now." He turned and walked out before Daniel could say another word. Outside, the London air bit cold against his skin. He didn't know where to go. Home felt hollow. Work felt poisoned. He sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel, breathing hard. How do you mourn a father who lied to you, and forgive a brother who never knew? As his phone buzzed with messages from Sophie, apologies, pleas, regrets, he switched it off, staring into the gray horizon. Sometimes the truth doesn't set you free. It just builds a different kind of cage. Elliot drove aimlessly through the streets of London, the rain painting streaks across the windscreen, blurring the city lights into a smear of color and confusion. Every corner he turned seemed to echo with the ghosts of conversations he'd never have again. His father's voice, Sophie's laughter, Daniel's quiet disbelief. By the time he stopped the car, he realized he was outside Penny Lane Cafe, the one his father used to take him to as a boy after Saturday errands. He sat there for a long moment before finally going inside. The bell above the door chimed softly, and the smell of coffee and baked bread hit him like a memory. He ordered a tea and sat by the window, the same seat he'd always chosen. Everything around him felt almost too familiar, as if time hadn't moved at all except for him. His thoughts raced, looping endlessly. My boss, my brother, my ex, my father's lies. It all felt too heavy to carry alone. The bell rang again. He looked up, and there was Sophie. Her coat was damp from the rain, her eyes red and tired. She hesitated before walking over. "You didn't answer my messages," she said softly. "I didn't want to." She sat down anyway, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup for warmth. "I didn't come to beg. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, truly sorry." Elliot didn't look at her. "Sorry for sleeping with my boss? Or sorry it turns out he's my brother?" She winced. "You know I didn't know that either. None of us did." "That doesn't make it hurt less," he replied quietly. "I know," she said. "I never meant to ruin you, Elliot. I was lost. We both were." Her voice trembled, and for a moment, she seemed more like a stranger than the woman he'd once planned a life with. "You were my home," she whispered. "But I think I broke the foundation long before Daniel came along." He stared out at the rain. "You didn't just break the foundation, Sophie. You burnt the house down." Silence hung between them. She nodded slowly, tears pooling in her eyes. Then I guess I'll stop trying to rebuild it. She stood to leave, then hesitated. He didn't know, Elliot, about any of it. Don't let your father's mistakes destroy both of you. When she was gone, he sat there for a long while, her words echoing in his head. He pulled the letter from his coat pocket again, reading the last line over and over. Don't hate him. None of it was his fault. He rubbed his face with both hands, a sigh escaping him. For the first time, the anger started to fade. Not gone, but thinning at the edges, leaving only exhaustion behind. That night, he found himself standing outside Daniel's flat. He didn't plan to go there, and his car just seemed to drive there on its own. Daniel opened the door, eyes shadowed, clearly not expecting him. We need to talk, Elliot said. Daniel stepped aside. Yeah, we do. Inside, the flat was silent except for the hum of the fridge. Elliot stayed standing, arms folded. I don't know how to process any of this, he began. You're the last person I'd ever want to share blood with, and yet here we are. Daniel nodded, his voice low. I get that, but I can't change who my parents were or what they did. I can only own what I did to you. And for that, for Sophie, I'm sorry. I really am. For the first time, Elliot believed him. Maybe because Daniel's voice cracked on the word sorry. I don't forgive you, Elliot said finally. Not yet. But maybe I'll try to understand. Daniel gave a faint, tired smile. That's more than I deserve. Elliot looked around the flat, the silence stretching comfortably this time. Funny, he said, almost to himself. We both spent years trying to prove ourselves to a man who never told us the truth. Daniel nodded. Maybe that's the one thing we actually have in common. They sat down, not as friends, not yet as brothers, but as two men trying to make sense of a shared wound. As Elliot left later, he looked back once more. For the first time in weeks, he felt something that wasn't anger. It was faint, fragile, but it was hope. And somewhere deep down, he knew this was the real beginning. The weeks that followed were quieter, not peaceful exactly, but less suffocating. The chaos that had once defined Elliot's life began to settle like dust after a storm. He stayed with his mother in Brighton for a while, helping her pack away his father's things. The house smelled faintly of old paper and aftershave, memories folded into every drawer. Some days were unbearable. His mother would find an old jumper or a photo from a holiday years ago and break down in tears. Other days they'd laugh, remembering his father's terrible jokes or his habit of pretending to hate the family cat while secretly feeding it treats. Healing didn't come all at once. It arrived in quiet moments between heartbreak and humor. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Elliot sat with Amelia on the back porch. She handed him a beer, clinking her bottle lightly against his. You look better, she said. Less haunted, he gave a half smile. I suppose I am. Talking to Daniel helped. A bit. Amelia raised an eyebrow. Really? I thought you were going to kill him. So did I, Elliot admitted with a laugh. But it turns out rage is exhausting. Besides, he's as confused as I am. None of this was his fault, Amelia nodded. You're turning into Dad. He looked out toward the sea. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. A week later, Daniel came down to Brighton. The two brothers, if they could be called that yet, walked along the pier talking about nothing and everything. It was awkward at first, but familiarity grew with every passing minute. Daniel told stories about his mother, Marianne, the woman Elliot had never met but suddenly felt deeply connected to. When they reached the end of the pier, Daniel stopped. You know, he said quietly, Dad wrote to my mom once, after she married my father. She never replied. Said it was too painful. Elliot frowned. Did she love him? Daniel nodded slowly. I think she did. Maybe they both did, just at the wrong time. They stood in silence, the sound of waves crashing below them. It struck Elliot then that their father's choices had created a mess neither of them asked for. Yet here they were, trying to untangle it with the same stubbornness that must have run in their blood. That night, Elliot returned to his childhood home and found his mother asleep on the sofa, his father's record playing softly in the background. He sat beside her quietly, And for the first time since the funeral, he didn't feel broken and just unfinished. He looked at the photo of his parents on the mantelpiece. His father's eyes seemed to hold something new now, not secrets, but sorrow and love mixed in equal measure. He whispered, "I get it now. Dad, you were just trying to protect everyone." Tears stung his eyes, but this time they didn't burn. A few days later, he visited his father's grave. The grass was still fresh, the soil dark and damp. He placed the letter, now creased and worn, beside the headstone. "You don't have to carry this anymore," he said softly. "I'll carry it from here." He stood there for a while, breathing in the salt air, feeling both lighter and heavier at once. Then, before leaving, he said the words that had sat on his tongue for weeks. "I forgive you." As he walked away, his phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. "Coffee tomorrow. Maybe we can start over, as brothers this time." Elliot smiled faintly, typing back a single word. "Yeah, sometimes healing doesn't come in grand gestures or perfect closure. Sometimes it's just two people, bound by blood and brokenness, choosing to try again." And as the tide rolled in beneath the Brighton pier, Elliot finally felt something that had eluded him for so long. Peace. 6 months later, London looked different to Elliot, not because the skyline had changed, but because he had. The city no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a place where he could start again. He'd left the radio company shortly after reconciling with Daniel. Too many ghosts in those walls. Instead, he'd taken a job producing a local podcast. Smaller, humbler, but more his pace. The show was about stories of second chances, people who'd lost, broken, or forgiven something they thought they never could. Every episode felt like stitching together a part of his own healing. One afternoon, while editing an interview, his phone buzzed. It was Daniel. "Daniel, coffee's gone cold. You're late." Elliot grinned, grabbed his coat, and walked down to the cafe near Waterloo Bridge, their new halfway point between his flat and Daniel's office. When he arrived, Daniel was already there, reading the paper, looking far too serious for someone drinking a cappuccino with extra foam. "Look at you," Elliot said, sitting down. "A proper grown-up now." Daniel rolled his eyes. "Says the man who spends his days talking to strangers about forgiveness." Elliot smirked. "Someone has to." "You'd be useless at it." They both laughed, the kind of laugh that comes easily when you've spent too long not being able to. As they talked, the conversation drifted. Work, their mum, football, life. Eventually, Daniel's tone softened. "You know, I visited Dad's grave last week. Took flowers." Elliot looked up, surprised. "You did?" Daniel nodded. "Felt right. Didn't know what to say, so I just sat there." For a while, Elliot smiled faintly. He'd have liked that. Silence settled between them, comfortable this time. Two brothers who had started as enemies, now bound by something deeper than shared blood, shared forgiveness. When they left the cafe, the London air was crisp, the late afternoon sun painting the Thames gold. They walked along the bridge in silence until Daniel stopped. "You ever think," Daniel said, "that maybe Dad didn't write that letter to tear everything apart? Maybe he wrote it to bring us together?" Elliot thought about it, about all the pain, the confusion, the anger. And then he nodded. "Yeah, I think he did." Daniel smiled. "Then I suppose he succeeded." They both laughed quietly, the sound lost in the rush of the city around them. Later that evening, Elliot returned home and sat at his desk. He opened his laptop and began typing the script for his next podcast episode. Title: The Truth That Healed Us. He paused for a moment, then began to write. Sometimes the truth arrives too late. Sometimes it breaks us before it frees us. But if we're lucky, it leaves behind something stronger than pain. Understanding. This is a story about two brothers who found family in the wreckage of lies, and it's a reminder that even in the darkest endings, there's always the possibility of a new beginning. He read the words aloud once, smiling softly. As he hit save, his phone buzzed. A message from Sophie. "I heard your episode last week. It was beautiful. I'm happy you found peace." He stared at the message for a moment, then typed back a simple reply. "Me too." He looked out the window, the city lights shimmering like a constellation of second chances. This time the past didn't feel like an anchor. It felt like a story finally finished, And for the first time in a long time, Elliot was ready for whatever came next. Elliot's voice filled the final moments of the episode, steady, calm, and full of quiet emotion. We spend so much of our lives searching for closure, trying to make sense of why people hurt us, why they leave, why they lie. But maybe closure isn't about answers. Maybe it's about acceptance. Maybe it's the moment you stop needing to rewrite the past and start choosing what to do with it. A soft piano track played underneath his words, gentle, reflective. My father's truth broke everything I thought I knew. But in that breaking, something new began. I found a brother. I found forgiveness. And most importantly, I found peace. He paused, letting the silence breathe. If you've ever had to forgive someone who didn't deserve it, or finally forgiven yourself, tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one, because these aren't just stories. They're reminders that none of us are alone in our pain. The music swelled slightly, the emotion in his voice soft but raw. And if this story touched you, share it. Someone out there might need to hear that even the deepest betrayals can lead to unexpected healing, that it's never too late to rebuild, to reach out, to start again. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile you can hear. This isn't the end. It's just a new chapter. Thank you for being part of it. As the outro music faded, the screen cut to black with a single line written in white text. Sometimes the truth doesn't destroy you. It sets you free. Then, below it, share your story below. Someone might find hope in your words.